I thought our love was unbreakable, but one night changed everything. Now, I'm left wondering if I missed the signs all along. I 24 meters and my girlfriend 23F, and began dating in college. We met during our sophomore year in Professor Thompson's literature class. I was immediately drawn to her infectious laugh and the way she'd scrunch her nose when concentrating on her notes. After a few weeks of stolen glances and awkward small talk, I finally worked up the courage to ask her out for coffee. That coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into movie nights, study sessions, and eventually, a relationship that would span the next 3 years. We moved in together after graduation, both landing entry-level jobs in the city. I joined a marketing firm, while secured a position at a tech startup. Everything seemed perfect. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our favorite takeout spots. We'd spend weekends exploring the city, trying new restaurants, or just lounging around our apartment, content in each other's company. Sure, we had our occasional disagreements, but nothing major. At least, that's what I thought. And started mentioning her coworker Joe about 6 months ago. At first, it was just casual mentions, how he'd brought in homemade cookies for the office, or how he'd helped her troubleshoot a particularly tricky piece of code. But gradually, his name started appearing more frequently in our conversations. Joe showed me this great new band, or Joe knows this amazing hole-in-the-wall restaurant we should try. I didn't think much of it initially, and had always been friendly and outgoing, quick to make connections with people. Besides, I trusted her completely. We had built our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and open communication. Or so I believed. As the weeks went by, I noticed subtle changes in Anne's behavior. She started staying later at work, citing project deadlines and team meetings. Our movie nights became less frequent, often canceled because she was too tired or had already made plans with work friends. I tried to be understanding. After all, her startup was growing rapidly, and I knew the tech industry could be demanding. Then came the social media posts. Anne rarely posted on Instagram, but suddenly her stories were filled with office events and team outings. Joe featured prominently in many of them, always looking effortlessly cool with his carefully styled hair and vintage band t-shirts. I learned through these posts that he was indeed an amateur musician, with a YouTube channel boasting over 100,000 subscribers. His covers of indie rock songs had apparently gained quite a following. I remember one evening when Anne came home particularly excited. She had been working on a project with Joe, and they had discovered they both loved the same obscure Swedish indie band. She talked about him for nearly an hour, how he had traveled through Europe following the band on tour, how he had taught himself to play guitar by learning their songs, how he had even met the lead singer at a small venue in Stockholm. I sat there, nodding and smiling, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Last week, Anne mentioned that Joe was throwing a party. She was clearly excited about it, going on about how he had rented out this trendy restaurant downtown and was inviting only the coolest people. When she first brought it up, she didn't mention whether I was invited. It wasn't until a few days before the event that she casually asked if I'd like to come along. She phrased it as if it were an afterthought. "Oh, by the way, I asked Joe if you could come to the party, and he said it was fine." Fine. Not of course. Or the more the merrier. Just fine. Still, I agreed to go. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe meeting Joe in person would put my mind at ease, show me that he was just a friendly coworker and nothing more. The party was on Saturday evening. The restaurant Joe had chosen was one of those industrial chic places with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The kind of place that served craft cocktails in mason jars and had a menu full of items I couldn't pronounce. As soon as we walked in, Anne's entire demeanor changed. She seemed to light up, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Joe. He was exactly as I'd imagined him, tall, with that perfectly messy hair and a vintage Rolling Stones t-shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit. He greeted Anne with a warm hug that lasted a few seconds too long for my comfort, then turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "So, you're the boyfriend," he said, extending his hand. "Anne's told me so much about you." Somehow, I doubted that. The first hour or so wasn't terrible. Anne introduced me to some of her other coworkers, and I managed to have a few decent conversations. But I couldn't help noticing how often Anne's gaze drifted to wherever Joe happened to be. How she laughed just a little too loudly at his jokes. How she seemed to gravitate towards him whenever he moved to a different part of the room. As the evening wore on, the party started to break up into smaller groups. That's when I wandered into Anne's little discussion circle, and the atmosphere instantly changed. The conversation, which had been flowing freely, suddenly became stilted and awkward. Anne's body language shifted, she angled herself slightly away from me, creating a subtle but noticeable barrier. "Joe, naturally, was holding court in the center of the group. He was telling some story about a gig he'd played at South by Southwest, complete with elaborate hand gestures and carefully timed pauses for effect. Everyone was hanging on his every word, and most of all, she was looking at him the way she used to look at me, back when we first started dating. I tried to contribute to the conversation, mentioning a concert I'd been to recently. Joe barely acknowledged my comment before launching into another story about his musical exploits. The message was clear: I wasn't really part of this group. I was an outsider, tolerated only because of my connection to Anne. After what felt like an eternity, I excused myself to get a drink. I ended up chatting with one of Joe's friends, Mark, who worked in IT. He seemed like a decent guy, and for a while, I almost forgot about the uncomfortable situation with Anne. Almost. As the party started winding down, I went to find Anne, thinking it was time to head home. That's when Joe approached me, all fake smiles and false camaraderie. "Hey, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were old friends. "A few of us are heading back to my place for an after-party. Just a small group, you know?" I was about to decline. I'd had more than enough of Joe for one evening, when he added, "Sorry, but only Anne is invited." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. But no, there he was, still smiling that smug smile, waiting for my reaction. "Don't touch me," I said first, shrugging off his hand. Then, trying to keep my voice steady, I added, "She's not going." Joe's smile widened slightly. Actually, she already said yes. My heart sank as I pulled out my phone to text Anne. Her response came quickly: "Sorry, on the way to Joe's place. I'll see you tomorrow, love you." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Did you know I wasn't invited?" I texted back. No response. Just those three little dots that appeared and disappeared, telling me she'd read my message but chosen not to reply. The drive home was a blur. I barely remembered getting into my car, let alone the actual journey. My mind was racing, playing out every possible scenario of what might be happening at Joe's place. Were they laughing about me? Was this a regular occurrence? How long had this been going on? I tried watching TV, but couldn't focus on anything. I attempted to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Anne laughing at Joe's jokes, looking at him with that sparkle in her eyes that used to be reserved for me. So instead, I sat by the window, watching the hours tick by on my phone. 4 a.m. No sign of Anne. 4:30 a.m. Still nothing. 5 a.m. The streets were completely empty. Finally, at 5:42 a.m., a car pulled up outside our apartment building. I recognized Joe's vintage Mustang instantly. He bragged about restoring it himself during one of his many self-aggrandizing stories at the party. And got out of the passenger side, and even from my vantage point, I could see her swaying slightly. She leaned down to say something to Joe through the window, and her laugh carried clearly through the pre-dawn quiet. I watched as she waved goodbye, that cute little wave she does where she wiggles her fingers. The same wave she used to give me when I'd drop her off at class back in college. Joe's car lingered until she was safely inside the building, then drove off into the night. When Anne walked through the door, she startled slightly at seeing me still up. She was wearing the same clothes from the party, but her hair was slightly mussed, and her lipstick was mostly gone. "Oh, you're still awake?" she said, trying to sound casual but not quite pulling it off. "You didn't have to wait up for me." "We're done," I said quietly. "What?" She blinked at me, seeming genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "You and me. We're done. You have until the end of the day to move out." Anne's confusion quickly turned to indignation. "Are you serious right now? Nothing happened." "Right," I scoffed. "Nothing happened. You just spent the entire night at another guy's place after he specifically uninvited your boyfriend from his after-party." "Oh my God, is that what this is about?" She rolled her eyes dramatically. "You're being ridiculous. Joe and I are just friends. You're letting your insecurities get the best of you." "My insecurities?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Anne, you left a party with another guy, ignored my texts all night, and came home at nearly 6 a.m. How exactly am I being insecure?" "We were just hanging out. There were other people there too." She paused, then added unconvincingly, "They just left earlier." "Right. And I suppose Joe gave you a ride home out of the goodness of his heart?" "Actually, yes. He was being a gentleman, making sure I got home safely." I laughed humorlessly. A real gentleman would have respected the fact that you have a boyfriend. A real gentleman wouldn't have explicitly uninvited me from his after-party. We went back and forth like this for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. and oscillated between defensive anger and attempts at gaslighting me into believing I was overreacting. Finally, when she realized I wasn't backing down, her tone changed. "Fine," she spat. "Thank you for wasting the best years of my life." The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 years of memories, good morning kisses, lazy Sunday brunches, holiday celebrations with our families, all reduced to wasted years. The next few days were a blur of awkward encounters and tense silences as Anne packed up her things. She enlisted her sister Sarah to help, and I overheard them talking in hushed voices, Sarah occasionally shooting glares in my direction. I'm sure Anne was painting herself as the victim in all this, conveniently leaving out the part where she spent the night with another man. Word spread quickly among our mutual friends. Some took my side, others took hers, and a few tried to remain neutral. My phone was constantly buzzing with messages, some offering support, others demanding explanations. I ignored most of them. Yesterday was moving day, and had managed to find a short-term sublet, though I noticed she was suspiciously vague about where exactly it was located. As she was carrying out the last of her boxes, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "You're throwing away everything we built together over one stupid party," she said. "I love you. Isn't that enough?" I didn't respond. What could I say? That love without respect isn't enough? That trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair? That I couldn't unhear the way she laughed at Joe's jokes or unsee the way she looked at him? So I said nothing, and she left. Later that evening, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw that Joe had posted a story, a video of him playing guitar, covering some indie song I didn't recognize. The caption read, "New roommate approved of this one, guitar, musical note." In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was Anne's favorite coffee mug on a kitchen counter I didn't recognize. I closed the app and poured myself a drink. It's been a day since Anne moved out, and our apartment feels emptier than it ever has. Not just because of the missing furniture or the gaps on the shelves where her books used to be, but because the future I had imagined for us, the one with a house in the suburbs, maybe a dog, possibly kids someday, that future is gone too. Part of me wonders if I overreacted. If I should have given her another chance, listened to her explanations, tried to work things out. But then I remember the look on Joe's face when he told me I wasn't invited to his after-party. The way Anne ignored my texts all night. The sound of her laugh floating up from his car at 5:42 a.m. No, I made the right decision. It hurts now, but it would have hurt more to stay with someone who could so easily disregard my feelings and disrespect our relationship. My phone buzzes with a text. It's from Mark, Joe's IT friend from the party. "Hey man, thought you should know, Joe's been bragging at work about how Anne's staying with him now. Says they've had feelings for each other for months. I know it's not my place, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. Sorry." I don't respond, but I appreciate his honesty. At least someone in this situation has some integrity. Another buzz. This time it's Anne. "Can we talk? I miss you." I block her number. Tomorrow, I'll start the process of rebuilding my life. I'll join a gym, maybe take up a new hobby, focus on my career. All the things people say you should do after a breakup. But tonight, I'm allowing myself to grieve for what was lost and what could have been. As I sit here in my half-empty apartment, I can't help but think about the signs I missed or chose to ignore. The late nights at work, the increasing mentions of Joe's name, the gradual emotional distance that had been growing between us. They say hindsight is 20/20, and now I can see the pattern clearly. But despite the pain and betrayal, I know I'm better off knowing the truth. Better off without someone who could so easily throw away 3 years of love and trust for a guy with a YouTube channel and a vintage Mustang. So here I am, starting over at 24. It's not where I expected to be, but maybe it's where I need to be. And who knows? Maybe someday I'll look back on this as a blessing in disguise. But for now, I'm just trying to get through one day at a time, reminding myself that I deserve better than being someone's second choice. The last thing Anne said before she left still echoes in my mind. "You're throwing away everything over a party." No, Anne. You threw everything away the moment you decided that Joe's after party was more important than our relationship. I'm just the one who had the self-respect to walk away.